Hello, and welcome back to the sim. In this one, we're jumping back in to SPAD.neXt, but we're doing it with the new Dash 7. As you can see, we're here on the ramp with the Continental Express, and we're going to be doing a flight from Detroit all the way up, yes, I know we're at the wrong gates, all the way up to Billy Bishop in Toronto City Centre, using that dash to get into that cool field. So let's go ahead, jump in, and see what we got going. So we're going to keep it down here, and it's going to allow us to go through exactly what we've set up on the Bravo and matching it to the throttle quadrant as well as the autopilot and the autopilot annunciations. Maybe a little bit later we'll get up in the air and we'll go through some things, but the most important part about this video, to try to keep it short, is just what's mapped and where it is mapped to. So in SPAD.neXt, you're going to come in and you're going to go to your joystick devices. You're going to find your Bravo. You're going to go ahead and you're going to click on any button or any axis, anything you want. You're going to come down here to online snippets, right? You got to click on something, because if you don't, if nothing is highlighted, the right side is grayed out. So just make sure you click on something, click on online snippets. Once you've clicked on online snippets, it's always going to go to the button or axis that you were on first. So just remember, head on down to the complete device, and you're going to see Bravo throttle quadrant, complete device. Now, because we don't have current aircraft checked off, if we click on that, it's going to cycle it down. Now, of course, other people have published things for no specific aircraft, mean it'll show up for anything. So this doesn't always help you, but it does limit it a bit. However, if you use the search box and you look for Dash 7, you're going to find 9676. This snippet is designed around the TDS 750XI. I use the TDS. It's one of my favorite GPS units, and because of that, it was a reason why I actually bought the Pilot's Dash 7. Seeing this kind of plane using access to the GTN was kind of a reason for me to buy it. Now, this probably will work with the 530 or with the VOR only versions as well. So when you click on it, it's going to prompt you, do you want to replace all events? You're going to click yes. It's going to replace everything on the throttle. If you hit no, it's going to merge it with all the existing events that you still have. Now, that means you may have to go through and delete a whole bunch of stuff that you had, or you can hit cancel and it will do nothing. In your case, hit yes, and it will overwrite everything. Really quickly going through the control surface and the buttons and what we've got. Now, button number 9, 10, 11, and 12, that would be if you had one of the handles for the Boeing. So 22 and 23, they do look like buttons, and as you can see, we are using the elevator trim position. I find that's much smoother, and you can adjust this value, which is a value of radians, to dial in exactly the feel that you find works best, or that you think matches the wheel to the moving wheel in the sim. I found this one to be pretty good for me. Button 24. Button 24 is when the first throttle axis is down in the detent. And so what we've done here is we've created our LVAR for the left reverse mode, and then what you're going to find is on 25 for the right reverse mode. So this is going to be what you'll see, how we can toggle the throttles in and out of reverse mode. That way we can go down, and then we'll be able to dial in the amount of reverse thrust and the lower beta. 26, 27, 28, and 33. Yeah, weird how they did it. But those are going to be the next 4 handles and their detent positions. So each one of these detent positions is going for its LVAR for the engine lever conditioners. Down is a 0, released is a 1. And that's just the position of the condition lever. There's actually 0, 1, 2, and then you actually have a 3 to 4 range. So 1, then 2 is low flow, and then you get to normal, and then from normal all the way to the top, until you come back is 3 to 4, and that's a granular range for controlling the prop. It's kind of neat. We'll see it when we jump back into the plane and look at the handles. When you get to button 29, that is the auto throttle ToGa event, and that's because you have that on this button. And again, that's really just for your flight directors, pitch up wings level. Button 30 would be on, I think, this handle. It's not there. 33, like we said, is at the bottom. And then 48, which I believe is this one's side push when it's got a Airbus there. So that's it for those push buttons. The axes, we've labeled them, and this is where things get a little interesting. So as we've explained before, this will be with that reverse mode set to a 0, so it has the condition of the throttle reverse mode. We simply made that by picking a variable and creating our own new local variable, which is throttle reverse mode. When that's equal to 0, then we are going to control throttles 1 and 2. We just don't have enough handles, and the condition levers, ironically, are more important because of how you have to start engines and introduce fuel and control the props. So I found these are less likely to be different than one another, plus how they look in the sim is pretty tiny, so it works for that. So of course, we moved them all the way to the top. We hit set, we moved them all the way to the bottom, we hit set, and then we clicked OK, and that's all we had to do. So once we had that all set up, we then added another one, this time for throttle left reverse mode equals 1. So again, that's just what I chose to name it. That's not a special variable. It's a local variable, not an LVAR. This time we chose the standard axis of reverser. So here we're going to go engines 1 and 2, and here the range is 0 to minus 4096. That's just what that standard axis understood. And again, we went 0 to 1023. Works perfectly. And so we were good to go. So we went ahead, we copied that, we pasted it to here, and then we changed this to a throttle right reverse mode. We changed these to engines 3 and 4. And then we came on down here and we did the same thing. Changed that to throttle reverse mode 1, and then we changed the reverser to engines 3 and 4. And as always, save your work as you go. So what's happening with the condition levers when we look at these is you'll notice that there are 3 ranges that we have set up. So remember, when we move it into the down position, that's going to set the value to 0. And when we come into the first position, it's going to set it to 1. However, if we moved up to what would be 2, the problem is that you still need an axis range. When we bring it down, it sets it back to 1. So for that, we set an offset range. So we came in, we said add action, custom axis event, right? And it brings up this dialog for the custom axis. So when we look at that dialog, you'll see that I set a range definition. So I enabled that, yes. And we set a from and a to. We made sure that we're going to do axis value and the raw rescaled value, and it's a 1 to a 1. And we're also only sending it one time. So once it triggers once, it's not going to send again. And so what I did is I came down to 0, and I brought it up just a little bit. And it's wherever you feel. I ended up at like 16. The point is it's just when it comes down into this small area. So we just hit set. Or you can also type in a value. So type it in. We said yes, we wanted to rescale and 1 to 1. Now, you could have said no to rescale. You could have not used the rescale, and you could have forced the value to a 1. Because I originally needed to build the range for the top part, I kind of just copy pasted and kept them the same, in which case I just changed the rescale of 1 to 1. Doesn't matter. It's just going to send a 1 whenever it's in this range, and it's only going to do it one time. So once we did that and we were good to go, we clicked OK. So we now had our first position. Next, for the second position, again, I copied and I pasted. So you can, click on event, click here, copy this event, or you can see you can just press Control C. So I pressed Control C and then I hit Control V. Then I took this and I edited it. and I edited it to look like this. And so here we are again, and again, we're controlling the LVAR for the engine lever conditioner 1. And now what I did was I just moved this up to kind of where this line was that I could see. So there's a little line here, and I was like, all right, well, just kind of before the line, and then just kind of after the line, where is that? And so I looked at these values here, and I decided, okay, well, I'm just going to type in 260 and type in 340. And anytime I kind of look down and this is in this area, it's going to be correct. And we're still using a one-time value, but this time we want to send a 2. Again, we want the axis value, raw rescale value. This has to be on, and this has to be on. If you don't have this on, it uses the actual axis value. If you say rescale value, it uses whatever value here is being mapped into this value. So within this range to this value. It'll make more sense because here we're setting the same value, but it'll make more sense on the next one. Then what we had to do was the final range. And this is the original range that I built to figure out how to make it work. And all the others I knew I would just send a value. So it was more important to figure this part out. So on this one, again, I moved up to roughly where I wanted normal flow to be, which I decided was, again, this line here. But I found this mapped in the sim visually. It felt right. But effectively what happened was I brought it to about here. And again, the values was close. So I said, okay, I'm just going to put in 580. And then you go all the way up to the top. You set 1030. This, though, is not one time. Because what we want to do is from this point down here to this point at the top, we want this to be the scaling range from 3 to 4. Now, yes, I use the data monitor, and then I move the condition lever inside the sim to see what it did. And that's when I found that from the normal flow position to the full prop, full flow, whatever you want to call it, that's when it went from 3 to 4, and it automatically does decimal scaling from 3 to 4. So from 580 to 1023, we're going to go from 3.0 up to 4.0 and the decimals in between, and it comes out real nice. And that's why we don't want to send it one time, because as this changes, every time it changes, it needs to rescale the value, needs to send it. So it sends that condition lever, and it uses that rescaled value. That is how we set those up. And they were really the most important part in all this, considering you don't want to blow up engines and how you have to do the start and then introduce fuel for each engine one at a time, start them one at a time, and do all those processes. Plus, in the air, that is a lot of control that you need to dial in the amount of fuel and your prop speeds. So very important to have all of those condition levers I found and double up the throttles instead. So all we did there was we copied, we pasted, and then we went into each one of these and we changed the VAR from condition lever 1 to condition lever 2. And so once we did all that, everything was good and ready to go. Autopilot and switches. So again, almost everything is mapped 1-to-1. So we've got the gear, we've got the lights for our gear position lights. So those are all set up to do those correctly. And then what's going to happen is the rocker switches. So the first rocker switch is going to be the parking brake. So that maps to the parking brake in the sim. Works great. Second one is going to be the lever control lock. This is more of a visual thing. Even when the control lock is up and you move the throttles, you're going to find that it goes right through it. It doesn't block it like the ATR does. Then what we did so that we can start the engine just from the Bravo is we went on the next 4 switches to select the knob starter. And again, we'll show that in the sim when we start the engines to show how this works. Finally, we went with the push starter button, which is to turn on the actual starter. This is for selecting which engine will start. Since they're switches, up is going to turn that engine to be the one that will be started. 0 sets it back to off. So all 4 down has the engine starter's knob selector set to 0. Flaps is flaps. So I got the usual where single press moves it 1 notch. If you hold it, it will move it all the way up or all the way down. The knob over here, yes, I've got it set up.
Bravo ALT, Bravo VS.
Nothing beyond that.
Bravo
I just did a couple.
Bravo
And
ALT.
that was to show you guys just an example of using that text-to-speech. So on that switch press, when 21 is switched on, it's going to use the text-to-speech, and it's going to say Bravo A space L space T, so it says the ALT. Again, if you don't like these things, just delete them. It's hard for me to see what position it's in, so it's always nice to just be able
VS. Bravo ALT.
to know what position it's in before I start turning the knob. Heading is heading. If you long press, it will do the heading sync, and yes, the AS1000 heading sync event will send the key event. On the nav button, we've got nav1 hold, so that'll turn on nav hold mode. And for the long press, we threw in the GPS toggles nav1. Approach is approach hold mode, but a long press is going to send the approach loc hold, which is what turns on the VOR mode, as we'll see in the plane. Reverse is the back course hold mode, so since there is a back course hold button in this case, we went ahead and threw that on there. For altitude, the long press is going to be the altitude hold mode, and the short press is going to be toggling the VNAV button value. This is what they chose to use to track their altitude select mode. So they're using this for altitude select mode. So you have the altitude select mode, and then you pick your, VS, pitch, IAS, climb, however you want to get up to the altitude that you've dialed in. Under VS is VS mode. IAS is IAS mode. Though I do have it that on the long press of IAS, that'll toggle the flight director, since we don't have a flight director button on the panel. And what you're going to find is when you jump over to the autopilot button, that's where I've gone ahead and thrown in the AP master on the regular press, and long press is going to toggle your yaw damper for you, because again, no yaw damper button on this panel. When you look at the knob, it's been stolen from one of our many other events. One of the ones that I showed you how to do acceleration, actually, using the knob. So this one's got all kinds of events and all kinds of conditions. You can see how I did it before, or you can just look at it when you jump in. But this way we can add some of our own acceleration, because we're using events to send the events. Jumping down to the Annunciators. So here on the Annunciators, I've got these mapped out, similar to the way I've done it before. Engine fire should go for all 4 engines. Vacuum is going to check the vacuum. Low oil pressure, all 4 engines. Hydraulic pressure, all 4 engines. Low fuel pressure, all 4 engines. Aux pump, again, all 4 engines, if it's on or off. Anti-ice, parking brakes, starter engaged, low volts, APU. And again, APU, it actually is following the ground power. So if I toggle that ground power switch off, that annunciator will go out. And then we got the door. So I've got a door button. It's the standard door event to turn the door on, to open and close the door. So when the door is open, as soon as it starts to open, you'll see that it goes on. And then when we close the door, as soon as it's fully closed, it goes off. All right, so looking back into the sim, when we were talking about the condition levers, so as you can see, up moves into the next position, and then you have that granular movement. And then we get down there, and then cut off and idle. So again, we went ahead and we put the flap lever on the flap paddle. We just ran out of axis, obviously. As you can see, the trim wheel, again, if you want to add more to make it a bigger trim, you can. And then as you can see, we've got the trim indicator moving. So it's all about what you want it to feel like. I find it feels pretty good. So we've got our parking brake off, parking brake on. We can turn on the control lock. We can turn off the control lock. Throttles all the way up. And then like we said, we come down. That toggles into reverse. Come up, And now we're going to be in the reverse. So up here on the autopilot, let's go ahead and flight director's off. It is going to be in standby mode. And so like I said, if I hold down the IAS button, that's going to toggle on the flight director. And so if we just, we'll just zoom in for you guys, see it a little bit better. But yeah, so if I hold that, that will toggle the flight director. So it works great. Moving it back into standby. And of course, if you enabled something like heading mode, it's automatically going to turn the flight director on like it should. If we turn on NAV mode, it's going to go into capture mode. So again, heading will go off. Capture will go on when it actually takes over. Currently, it hasn't actually captured. That should say ARM, but I guess it's just what they're doing with their autopilot. It should say ARM, but they don't have any emissives for the ARM. Approach, as we mentioned, so we'll go into approach mode. And like I said, if I hold it down, right, that will allow us to put it into, so there's your back course, there's your approach. So everything toggles on and works pretty well. And then if I hold it down, it goes into just VOR mode. And we can go ahead and hold it and toggle off VOR mode. So it works really well like that. And again, you'll see that when you turn on reverse, it turns on VOR mode as well, which means the approach button is going to blink. We got it set up so that it is going to blink for us. So that means that it's VOR mode. Then we come over to the altitude. So altitude is going to enable altitude select. So it's going to arm altitude select. So when we are on altitude with the handle, you'll see that the pre-selector is dialing. So we get the altitude exactly where we want. Then we go ahead and we hit altitude select. Now, right now you would be in pitch mode and it would use pitch mode, or in VS mode, and you select VS. Now it's going to dial up your VS, your vertical speed that you want to capture with. There is no display on this. So just like in the real plane, you'd be using the pitch wheel and just watching your VSI and using the pitch wheel to smooth out the VSI, I guess. And of course, it's going to blink until we capture it. And when it captures, it's going to go ahead and switch to altitude. Now, if you hold the altitude button for a long press, it's going to do altitude capture. So that's going to turn on the altitude mode. And of course, you can toggle off and toggle on altitude select. That still works as it does in the plane, but we are in altitude hold mode. So it's pretty cool that you can do both. It's the same as if you were pressing the buttons in here. I can still toggle on and toggle off that independent of toggling on altitude hold. So just keep that in mind. VS or IAS mode. And again, coming down here onto the panel, we can go into VS mode or we can go into IAS mode. So it does work the same. The only problem is in the sim, you'll see the same behavior happens where if I was in IAS mode and I hit VS, you have to first turn off IAS before you can turn it on. So that's a bug there that they really need to address in regards to VS should be canceling the other modes because it is canceling the flight level change mode under the sim. The problem is they don't have update code running to change their LVAR that they've got for their IAS mode, which I don't understand when they could just have IAS mode tracking flight level change state and just dump the LVAR for IAS. They don't need it. So standby, if you press standby, of course, it's going to go into standby, turn off the flight director. If the flight director was on and you turned off the flight director, it's going to go into standby. So that's why we did it with the flight director mode. Standby also won't function. If you have the autopilot on, it will never let you press standby and disable it because the autopilot is on. So you have to have the autopilot off, in which case, even this button, turning the flight director, that'll do the same thing as getting you to standby mode. So it works great. Really happy with it. Looking up top, that's this button right here. So if we turn the external power off, you'll see that our APU light went out down here. So that's pretty cool. External power is on. Great. We're going to go ahead and get the batteries on. Now we can turn external power off, and we should still have power. We need to turn the master control for the batteries on. There we go. Okay. Master control for the gens and the DC gens. We will turn those on, but the DC generators themselves are not on yet. Perfect. Okay. So this is the part we were talking about, these switches. So getting into the starter switches. So you're going to see that that turns the knob to 1. That'll turn it back to off. If that's on and we switch this on, it'll go to 2. If we switch this off, it's going to go to off. So I kind of just have a flow of when I use it, back to off. But again, you could have them go 1, 2, 3, 4. Whichever one hits off is going to go back to off. Even with these off, you can turn the starter on. Of course, nothing is going to start spinning because we don't have any engines at this time set up. Let's go ahead and watch an engine start. So we're going to start with engine number 4. Why not? So we're going to turn on engine number 4, and then we're going to enable start. So now we can see the torque going, and we're watching that NG. And then we introduce fuel. So we're going to go ahead and we are going to turn that off. We're going to turn that one to the on. And because we left that on, we can see that engine has started spooling. We're looking here for the NG to get into the green. It's now into the green. We can move it into the low position. And there you go. We've got an engine going. So let's go ahead and start this one from the outside just so we can see it from here. So we're going to go ahead, start engine number 2. We see it spooling. We're going to give it just a little bit extra time. Probably good enough. And we'll go ahead and put it into the low. And there it goes, and it is spooling up. So we're going to come down, we're going to turn this off. And you can see now no starter is engaged. So the Annunciator is working correctly because, yes, it's in start mode, but the actual starter is not engaged because the knob is in the off position. So that's currently correct as well. If we turn this off and we go to engine 1 for the knob, now that we're ready to start engine 1, you'll see it also does not engage because it's not actually firing until there. There we go. And now we can see that the fuel pressures are starting to go out. Vacuum's out. And the other low oil pressure, we're in the green. Go ahead and move it into position. So now our cutoff, we're all in. So now we can go ahead and move that to the off, move that to the off, and we are in a good place. And right now all we've got is anti-ice and parking brake. So I think currently for the anti-ice, I've got that set to it might only be set to the windshield, but I don't think it's triggering even though that's got the windshield heat. If we turn on all of those, it's also not currently going out. So that's one of those ones I'm going to work on. But as you can see, there you go. That's the setup. for the entire Bravo. It works like a charm. I think you can grab this and get yourself flying and into the air. Don't forget, when you start taxiing, you're going to want to make sure to move these guys at least up into the low flow. But you'll find that you could go all the way down in the feather position. Even in feather, it's still going to move a little bit, it feels like. So just make sure you get them up into the low flow and go ahead and taxi away. Well, guys, with that, we're going to go ahead and cut it here. If you made it this far, please hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't. Come along with us next time. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day.